picking up with chapter 25, and we kind of had, with Luke's narrative style, he's compressed 2 years into one sentence at the end of chapter 24, right? So, again, in verse, chapter 24, verse 27, after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So enough with Felix, he's off the stage, and we're on to Festus. Now, again, the one thing to underline is that the more we know about the history of the region and of the time period, the more Luke's narrative stands up. That this, we have basically the characters of the Roman world are all in secular history. That is, they're all attested by Josephus, also by Roman, Suetonius, by Latin historians, wrote about these characters and their complicated, tangled lives. And so that's something that, again, Luke underlines, in this chapter, he's going to underline how Paul is really now moving in a completely different context, a completely different world. That is where, Paul was kind of traveling the Roman roads, speaking in small towns, going to synagogues, occasionally brushing up against a local municipal bureaucrat. But look at how Paul's situation has changed. So for a while, he was at the temple, he had the Sanhedrin, but now he is in Roman, he has entered into the Roman of the world of high Roman politics. So to be encountering a Roman governor of a province, that was no mean position to have. That was a significant person. You would have had some sort of senatorial connection. You may not have been from a senatorial family yourself, but you were connected to get these sorts of jobs, precisely in many ways because of the lucrative opportunities for off-book revenue that such jobs provided to those who held them. And so again, Luke underlines that when he talks about how Felix was basically waiting to be bribed by Paul. That was a common way that people kind of made money through these positions. And really, in a sense, bribeless government is really, I was talking about modern inventions today, and in a sense, bribeless government is actually one of the good things from the Enlightenment. So it's like, I'm not saying, the Enlightenment isn't completely bad. It did lead to this interesting period in human history where we expect people to do their government jobs without being bribed by people. That seems to be an expectation we have. And we ought to recognize that is relatively recent in the human experience. Most of the time, you had to bring a little bakshish, to make things happen. And the Psalms are a testimony to how the innocent sufferer, got the short end of the stick. So here's Paul, and 3 days, picking up in chapter 25, 3 days after Festus arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea, and, in parentheses, Caesarea Maritima, so the main Roman governance city and seaport on the coast of the Mediterranean, from Caesarea Maritima to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. So right away, Luke indicates that, these guys put their oars in the water, right away with Festus. So 2 years may have passed, but it really was just like one sentence as far as the Sanhedrin is concerned. They are still red hot, mad about Paul. And so so you have to imagine kind of the political capital that they are willing to spend to try to get Festus now to do him a favor, hey, Festus, this may not have come across your desk yet, but you have a guy in custody down there in Caesarea Maritima. We were wondering if we might, you might send him back to us. So that's kind of the spirit of this request. So they appealed to him and requested, as a favor to them against Paul, to have him transferred to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, planning an ambush to kill him along the way. So they're back to the old gambit, right? The idea is that we're going to try to ambush and assassinate him as he's being, kind of walked around, and where he's vulnerable. And now the difference from early in the narrative, though, is that you just had like those 40 guys who took an oath, right? Now it's the leaders of the chief priests and leaders in Jerusalem are now personally involved in the plot against Paul. So it's kind of been taken up a notch. And again, Luke is underlining how just the murderous hostility against Paul is utterly implacable. They are absolutely bent on getting his blood. So Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, he said, let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. So this is how we know, and actually we do know from history, that Festus was actually a very able and effective administrator. He was known to be effective, whereas Felix, his predecessor that we just read about in chapter 24, Felix was known for his corruption and his inability to basically bring the Judean province to heel. That basically things had gotten worse in terms of the brigandage in Judea, and the revolutionary activity. And again, as I've talked about earlier, the Sanhedrin, the aristocracy in Jerusalem, were really critical of Felix about his inability to basically get the guerrilla war under control. And again, the guerrillas were just as happy taking the stuff of the aristocracy when they were going back and forth, to their summer homes from the city, as they were taking stuff from the Romans. So they were just as much a problem for the upper class Jews as they were for the Romans. And so we know that they were critical of Felix. They sent a deputation to Rome to criticize Felix's governance. So now you have Festus, who is a shrewder and a sharper character. And so what Festus does, note what Festus does and does not do here. He doesn't give them what they want right away. He doesn't say, oh, sure, I'll send down for Paul and have him brought right up to you. Instead, he kicks the can down the road a little bit and gives himself some breathing room and makes sure that if whatever decision is going to be made on his turf when he's comfortable in his fortress, not in a city where he and his soldiers are a small minority. So he says, hey, clearly, this must be a serious matter. I tell you what, let me hear all about it back in Caesarea. And so the Jews, in a sense, are put back on their heels, because in the sense that what Festus is offering here as a favor is to reopen the case against Paul. So on the one hand, he doesn't set Paul up for an assassination. On the other hand, he does give them this much, and he doesn't give them, so basically they have to play by his rules, right? To say, okay, so they all go back down to Caesarea. So after he stayed among them, not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day, he took his seat, or his sat on the bench. It's the judicial seat of judgment on the tribunal, and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. And you have to imagine a scene where they literally encircle Paul. It's a picture for Luke, who again is writing to a Greek audience, this scene of just rabidly angry enemies of Paul surrounding, shouting charges at him in front of the new governor, is supposed to be utterly discrediting to his Greek audience. It's like, the Greek audience is like, no enlightened people behave that way. That's not good manners. And again, and so throughout this narrative, contrast Paul's own behavior. I mean, Paul, as I pointed out, Paul is cool as a cucumber. and he is willing just to look people in the eye and basically, say what he, needs to say. And he's tactically shrewd. So again, Luke has Paul in the role of the classic philosopher, in the Greek sense, not someone who has a PhD, but rather the philosopher as someone who is, able to control his passions, who is able to find the right thing to say at the right moment in order to achieve the desired result. So Paul is again, this is in a contrasting to the way that Paul is portrayed. So they surround him, bringing many serious charges which they could not prove. So not only are they, they're rabidly angry, but they can't even prove anything that they're accusing him of. So Paul said in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against the emperor. So now for those of you who were with me last week and we saw the first trial, which one of those is new? Basically, there are three areas of accusations: against the Jewish ethos, the law of the Jews; against the temple. Now those two things Paul had already defended himself against with Felix. But a new field of charges has been opened up. So again, Luke doesn't tell you what the crowd from Jerusalem, specifically charges Paul with, but we can read it in reverse, basically through Paul's own defense. So what they've done here is they've started to shift their ground and to say, okay, clearly we can't get the Romans to do what we want them to do by accusing him of a crime against the temple. So we better shift to accusing him of crimes against the emperor. That will motivate Rome. And again, from the gospel narratives, we know that this is in fact a strategy that does work. If you remember from, especially St. John's gospel brings this out, but Luke's gospel brings it out too. If you remember John's gospel, it's like, basically if you don't crucify him, you are no friend of the emperor's. This man says he's a king, and if you don't punish him, you're no friend of the emperor. And then it's like, then Pontius Pilate's in an impossible situation. He's good, So basically that's the strategy that the Jerusalem faction is pursuing. So he says, I haven't committed any crime against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? So, kind of Festus tries to slip something to past Paul, like, hey, I'll be the judge, but would you be willing to go up to Jerusalem? And that's, you're from there, right? You're familiar, and certainly you wouldn't object to a change of venue. Okay, well, again, for Paul, you can't, Paul wasn't born yesterday. He didn't just fall off that turnip truck. He knows exactly what's going on. Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. So we need to understand that the appeal to the emperor is on Paul's part, is a desperate maneuver. Paul now understands, he fully understands with Festus's, this invitation or offer by Festus, Paul now understands how vulnerable he is. He is in deep trouble. He is right now in probably in as great a danger as he was since he left Jerusalem. So to appeal to, it's like basically Paul says, I'll take your change of venue, but not to Jerusalem. I'll take it to Rome. How about that? Why don't we just move this whole show to Rome? And it's a desperate ploy. Why? Because it's this system, even though the Romans is a system of laws, the thing is that it's not like, again, our modern court system, where if you appeal, you get to have your appeal heard, right? Festus Festus can bury Paul and no one would know. Festus doesn't have to grant an appeal. Festus can say, I don't think so. Festus can have Paul killed. For us as moderns, it's hard for us to kind of really enter into the powerlessness of Paul. But so really, Paul has to play his best cards on this hand. This is like, he is just, if you play hearts, Paul has to shoot the moon here. I mean, he's got to go for it. There's no holding back. And so he appeals to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now, if I am in the wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I am not trying to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. So what Paul's point here, and what Luke wants to highlight about this stage of Paul's offense, is that Paul is not a coward. I mean, so basically by having Paul say, hey, listen, it's not like I'm afraid of death. And we know from Paul's letters, Paul's own letters said he put his own life in danger. And of course, we know from Acts of the Apostles how many times Paul came close to death. I mean, Paul is no physical coward. He's not a moral coward. So he's not doing this to try to run away from the fight. But what Paul is unwilling to do is hand a victory to the Jewish authorities. He's just, this isn't about courage. This is, I'm just not going to let these guys win. I am not going to just give myself over to these guys when I know they're going to kill me. And basically Paul is willing to be killed for Jesus, but he's not willing to be killed by these guys. It's like, anybody but these guys. I'm not going to be handed over to them. And so Luke has a little nuance in his Greek. When he says, if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. The Greek word is the word, basically it'd be better translated. Now the NRSV kind of tries to capture this kind of extradition sort of situation, kind of turn him over to those authorities. But Luke uses the word basically, no one can give me to them. But the Greek word for the give is the same word for gift. Basically, I'm not going to let you give me as a gift to these guys. And that's what, so no one can give me to them as a favor is what he's saying. It's like, I'm not going to allow myself to be a pawn in this little game you're playing. I want to go to Rome. I appeal to Rome. And then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, you have appealed to the emperor you will go. And we have to hear in Festus basically, I'm done. He has successfully washed his hands. He's figured out. So the reason for him going to this council is, we can kind of read between the lines, is he's basically saying, hey guys, do you suppose we could actually just send him to Rome? Would that solve the situation? And they're like, actually, that might work. And so basically he comes in, it's like, you bet, absolutely, off you go. And then he turns to the Jews, and that what he does when he turns to the Jews, it says, guys, he appealed to it's out of I wanted to give him to you. I really did. If it was up to me, he'd be on the next train to Jerusalem. But, he appealed, and how the law is, and and so best let him go. And so what are we up to now? So, it's like, let's turn the page. That Paul chapter's over. Off he goes. And it solves a huge problem for Festus. Now, it's interesting in the text that we've seen Paul kind of announce his Roman citizenship at critical junctures, haven't we? I mean, when Paul has really had his back against the wall, he will play the Roman citizen card, but now he's playing it. It's one thing to play that card against local magistrates. It's another thing to play it against. These guys are big fish. Festus is a big fish in the Roman pond, even as big a pond, the Mediterranean, right? So he's a big fish, and Paul's playing this card, and so again, it's a very risky play, but Paul shoots the moon. He wins, with very little resources going for him, except his own his own pluck, and a little bit of luck, and we might say the Holy Spirit helping things out a little bit to get Festus to say, you know what, that's fine, we're going to let him go. But also, Festus seems to assume Paul's citizenship. And that's a claim that we, as moderns, there is no way for us to verify. You know, it's not like they kept lists that we still have of lists of the citizens of Rome. We don't know. But it seems to be, it's done, you know, that Paul evokes this or invokes his citizenship so many times during the narrative, and with Festus seemingly to believing him, it does seem to be something that we can give historical credence to, that this was a fact, that Paul was indeed a Roman citizen. And again, we know from, I mean, again, Josephus is one of our most important sources of information about not just Palestine, but about the Roman life and the Roman Empire period. But Josephus writes about that the citizenship of Rome had been expanded considerably in the basically in the early years of the first century. So like from 0 to 30 and onward, that Rome actually did begin to sell citizenships in order to raise money. And so that lots of people avail themselves of it. So, you know, basically, you know, there are some modern critics who say, how did a Jew from Tarsus become a Roman citizen? You know, time out. That is absolutely preposterous. Well, actually, when you go, if you take Josephus, and Josephus certainly seems to ring true when you compare him with Suetonius and other records, Josephus, you know, seems to say that a lot of Jews actually had done this, had bought into the system. It's not Jews in Jerusalem, of course, but Jews who were in the diaspora around the Mediterranean. They bought into the Roman system as a source of protection, especially from the sorts of extrajudicial legal actions that, you know, the mob justice that we know from Acts of the Apostles could very easily break out against Jews in these little towns of the Greek, you know, kind of in the Greco-Roman world, like Corinth, right? And where's the other one we had? In Ephesus, there's the big riot in Ephesus. And so one way for a wealthy Jewish family to get some protection in that context is to buy a Roman citizenship. Then you're untouchable by the crowd. You can just, you know, if there's a riot, you just run over to the magistrate's house and say, I'm a Roman citizen, you have to protect me. And he did. He had to protect the Roman citizens in his town. Otherwise, it'd be his neck. So anyway, it's just a historical note that, again, seems to be something which has a great degree of credibility, that Paul was in fact a Roman citizen, and so that his claim is taken on face value by someone like Festus. So then we move into a new phase. It's actually, let me see if there's no chat. So before we get another set of characters on the stage here, just are there any questions so far about this part of Paul's trial, or no? Okay, we'll lay on. So in verse 13, after several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. Okay, so now you have two new characters. Now remember how Luke would introduce characters from the Christian community. You know, he introduced Barnabas, he introduced Timothy. You know, he's a very effective kind of, so now we're in this Roman world, the world of kind of the Roman imperial kind of bureaucracy and machinery. And so Herod Agrippa, and this is Herod Agrippa II. This guy's father was the one who was struck down with worms and died in chapter 12. So just so you can kind of place him in the narrative. And their grandfather was the Herod at Jesus's trial. So that, you know, if you just kind of work it back. So this is Herod Agrippa II. Bernice is his sister. Yes. So that she had been married, and then after her husband died, she moved in with her brother Herod. And this, again, as we know from contemporary histories like Suetonius, was a source of scandal and gossip amongst the Roman aristocracy around the Mediterranean. That basically this was going on in these client monarchs who were actually, the Caesar right now is Nero, who succeeded Claudius. And Agrippa II and Bernice both personally knew the family of the Caesar. So, I mean, talk about imperial connections, you know. And of course, the Caesars of Rome were not they were not the types to throw stones at unconventional family arrangements. So it certainly didn't faze them. And so, but it was, you can see how, again, with Felix, whose marriage to Drusilla, we talked about last time, was scandalous. And Paul, basically preaches to those two about self-control and the coming judgment. It's like, that probably was an unwise sermon. That was one place where Paul might have gone too far. But again, Luke makes the point that Paul preached that sermon to them because Paul is unafraid, right? He's, if he's going to be put on trial, he might as well be put on trial for saying, given the truth, speaking truth to power. So King Agrippa and Bernice has the local dignitaries very highly connected, and Agrippa II is, again, he has the territories in Galilee that his grandfather had. In addition, Nero gave him additional territories in Palestine. He was absolutely loyal to the Romans. And even during the Roman the Jewish revolt of AD 66, Herod Agrippa stayed loyal to the empire. They sided with Rome, and even as Rome slaughtered their people, they sided with Rome. In a sense, from a worldly point of view, they chose the right horse. They knew who the power was in that situation. That's why the Zealots, they took over Herod's palace on Masada, right? So Herod had fled. Herod had fled to Caesarea Maritima during that revolt. It's like he ran with his tail behind his legs straight into the Roman garrison at Caesarea, and so that left his fortresses and his palaces empty, and so that's where the Zealots wound up on Masada, and you can see the famous movie. On Masada. So anyway, so what the importance of King Agrippa and Bernice showing up is that these two make a perfect pair for Festus to co-opt to help him deal with the Paul situation. Why? Because that if he can send Paul to Rome on the recommendation of the Jewish, and you need to put that in scare quotes, right? The Jewish king, King Herod Agrippa II, then it's a perfect way to justify basically saying, hey, I didn't really know what any of these people were talking about, but your friend King Agrippa, he said that it was we shouldn't deal with this locally. He should be sent to Rome, and so then again he can turn to the Jews and say, hey, Agrippa said he should go. So again, I would have given him to you, but your own king said, his appeal should be honored. Again, Festus removes himself completely from any blame from either Rome above him or the Jews underneath him. It's a beautiful play on the part of Festus. So since they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man here who was left in prison by Felix. Blame the predecessor, always a good strategy. I have this mess on my hands. Felix, he couldn't handle anything right. Well, here's this guy. Felix left him here for me. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of the Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and had been given an opportunity to make a defense against the charge. Well, he didn't actually say that, but see, this is what Luke does. This is the art of Luke's narrative. He lets you see by kind of telling you how it went down, and then how it gets described later, he lets you see how these politicians shape the narrative, right? That this is Festus wanting to kind of shape this narrative for King Agrippa to describe how, I told him this was against the rules. They're a very silly people. And he goes on, you have to kind of have this in this very kind of arrogant, pompous sort of, self-presentation. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion. Now, this word is translated in the NRSV as religion, but it actually, the Greek actually shades into superstition. So it's like they have questions about their own superstition. These Jews all believe in. And it just drips with the superiority of kind of the local occupying power over the customs of the locals, right? And it's like basically these locals, who can tell? But hey, and so he's telling Agrippa, as someone who is ethnically kind of part Jewish and is kind of the local kind of our man in Havana, he has the local info, and yet Agrippa is also addressed as someone who's in Festus's class, basically Agrippa's not addressed as a Jew. He's addressed as someone who knows about Jews, but is himself within the circle of imperial power and privilege. So instead, they had certain points of disagreement about their own superstition and about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, again, you just says like, what can you do with these people? How was I supposed to figure out who was right and who was wrong in this situation? I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. I was really trying to do him a favor. I'm being the guy I am. I was trying to do Paul a favor. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of, and then in RSV translates his imperial majesty, but in Greek it's simply Augustus, the title which is the divine title of the emperors, the Augustus. For the decision of Augustus, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the Kaiser. Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So here we go. So now we have the stage is set for what Luke very colorfully describes as a very impressive first century Palestinian show trial. And you might think as we move on in this narrative that it's like, surely this isn't, surely Luke is making this up. Someone like Paul being, giving a defense against, you've got the Roman governor, you've got King Herod Agrippa there, and then you've got, in verse 23, it says, so on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp. And it's actually a wonderful Greek word. They came with great fantasia. It's where we get the word fantasy and phantasm from. They came with great fantasia. And they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Really? Would that happen? Well, once again, we know from Josephus that this happened in two other circumstances. We know that this very sort of situation where the tribunal invited Herod to come in to hear a trial, and they invited the local dignitaries from Caesarea. In another instance, Herod invited the local governor to come to be his guest at another sort of hearing or trial of this nature. And in the Gospels also, this is precisely what happened when Pontius Pilate invites Herod, basically sends Jesus to Herod. Why do this? Well, it's a favor that works both ways. So for the Herods that these Roman governors are working for, to be invited by the Roman governor to participate in proceedings like this gives them legitimacy. right? They get recognized as being a part of the local power structure. That they are, basically it marks them as very important people. So you better not mess with me because I'm friends with the Romans, who really are the powers in this place. If you remember, Luke in his own gospel says that after Herod sends Jesus back to Pontius Pilate, basically with his compliments, it says Pilate and Herod, who up to that time had been enemies, were friends from that day forward, right? And basically, he did Herod a favor. He did him a solid. He made him look like an important guy, right? And so, but what do the Romans get out of it? Again, the Romans get to co-opt local leadership. It's how the British ran the Raj, for Pete's sake. I mean, this is an ancient art that it's been, it's like, this is just a side note, but, a historical note. But I remember at my baccalaureate, one of the associate deans was giving the address, and she is British. And she noted that there were more members of the Stanford administration than there were in the British Raj in 1880. I mean, basically, the British Empire ran a subcontinent with fewer people than Stanford ran a university with. So anyway, I just, it's like, you can do that if you are very good at co-opting local leadership. And so the Romans were great at it. The Brits were great at it. You go in there and you co-opt the local aristocracy and you make them run the colony for you. And you just sit on top of it and collect the taxes. That's all you want anyway, right? You don't really want to have to be there. It's hot and humid. So you let the people who are used to living there do that. So here you got this big show trial. You got all the notables of Caesarea Maritima. And then Festus gave the order and Paul was brought in. So again, Luke just sets the theatrical scene, doesn't he? It's like, all the dignitaries, they come in with great pomp, great fantasia, and they're all in their places like, bring in the prisoner! And then out comes Paul, right? And, and little Paul, I mean, we know that Paul was diminutive in stature. And so again, Luke evokes this sort of, it should be funny in a sense that all these people are up in their pomp and circumstance and power, and in comes puny little Paul, right? Probably not well dressed in his prisoner clothes, in his literally in chains, to come and address this big group. So on the one hand, you have this huge power differential in those who are in the seats of judgment versus Paul. But on the other hand, of course, we know as the reader, the God lover, Theophilus, to whom the Acts of the Apostles is addressed, that another power is at work here that trumps everything that's going on in terms of Festus and his crew. So, bring in the prisoner. Festus said, King Agrippa, and all here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish community petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. Again, it's the underlining of the passions of the kind of locals. They're shouting. They just shout all the time. It's like, crucify him, crucify him. They're just always shouting. If they could just be quiet. I mean, it's like, just come on. So they're shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death. So if you're keeping count, this is the second time that a Roman official has declared Paul not guilty of anything deserving death. How many times do you think that's going to happen? It's going to be one more, 3 times to mean it, right? So 1, 2, 3, that really means he really is innocent. Guess how many times Pontius Pilate in Luke's narrative declares Jesus to have no crime that he is found that is worthy of death? 3 times. Jesus is declared innocent. So again, this is charting the structure of Jesus's own trial and his own passion, along with the underlining the idea that both Jesus and Paul are innocent sufferers. So he'd done nothing deserving death. And when he appealed to the Augustus, I decided to send him. But I have nothing definite to write to Now, I wonder what it is in your translation. Now, in the NRSV, it says our sovereign. But in the Greek, the word is nothing to write to ha Kyrios, the Lord. And that is, and we know that the first Caesar didn't use the title Kyrios or divine Lord as a self-descriptor. Or yeah, oh good. So some of the translations say what to send to my Lord, but it's not Lord with a small L. It's ha Kyrios. It's the divine Lord, the Augustus, the Caesar, and so what Luke does by evoking this title is that he again. The reader is challenged, who is the real Lord in this situation? Is it Festus's Kyrios or Paul's Kyrios? Who is the real power at work in the world? And that is this, in this trial, the smart money would be on Festus. Right? I mean, look at those guys. They came with all that phantasm and all that, all the important people in town are all there. The smart money would be on them, but the good money's on Paul, right? And so that's who you should be betting on in this situation. So therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa. Again, just that. Remember, I mean, that's just the underlining of this dynamic I've been talking about, especially King Agrippa in front of you, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. It's like, so, basically, I don't even know what to write on the extradition order. It's like this, who can tell with these Jews? And so thus it sets us up for the final speech of Paul in the final trial speech. And so, so just the last verse, is 26 verse 1, Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. And so then Paul will give one of his gestures. He'll stretch out his hand and then begin to give his defend himself. The Greek is give his apologia, right? His apology. So this is the third apology of Paul in the Acts narrative, and it will be the final one, right? First, second, third time, he'll be declared innocent unto 3 times, and then he'll be sent off to Rome in chapter 27.